Hi, I'm Guy Spiro, here with Social Sea Change and the coming election. I want to talk with you a bit on what's going on in the United States at this time in our process. You've all certainly heard the famous curse, "May you live in interesting times." Well, these times we are currently in are about as interesting as I would like to see them get. But there is a social sea change going on, and lightworkers, those of a liberal view of any kind, and anyone concerned with the betterment of humanity and general enlightenment really need to know what's going on. Now, there are always cycles within cycles within cycles. I want to give you a workable framework for understanding the changes we are now going through. In another video, I will be more specific about the astrological aspects themselves, but leaving those aside for the moment, there is a convergence of cycles coming together that appear both to be scary and fraught with danger, but also point to a resurgence of the long-range trend toward liberality and enlightenment. Now, I live in the Chicago region. If you live in this region, you probably know that the prevailing wind and weather comes primarily out of the west, sometimes from the northwest or the southwest, sometimes from the north or the south, and sometimes there is blowback from the east, but the prevailing wind is from the west. I bring up this example because I want you to understand that when you back up and take a look from a longer perspective, when you take the long view in our society and in the world at large, the prevailing wind is towards liberality and enlightenment on every front, from women's rights to civil rights, from a past that took genocide and slavery for granted to the present, when these things are not eradicated but have come light years from being just the way we did things. Look back over these past, say, 200, 250 years, and it is undeniable that we are moving in the right direction. But just as the wind is not always blowing from the west, so the direction of society blows back from periods of time. We are now emerging from one of those blowback periods. Now, I was born in the spring of 1952. Because I've made a discipline of remembering my childhood, I remember clearly those years leading up to what we think of as the 60s. I remember the Eisenhower years when, in response to the necessary changes in society during the World War II years, there was a blowback to a conservative cultural assumption that lasted into the 60s when the center of U.S. society swung back to liberality. We need to understand that the center of U.S. society is one of those overarching controlling factors of our society, and that center periodically moves left, then right, and then to the left. Out of that conservative cultural assumption of the 50s into the early 60s, the prevailing wind reasserted itself, and we moved further toward liberality and enlightenment, with women's rights and minority civil rights being perhaps the most obvious and lasting examples. In the early 80s, with the Reagan Revolution, the center swung back to the right. Now, if you were around in the 60s and 70s, and especially if you were part of the liberal side of things, there was a sense that this was the way it would be forever. It was never going to end. So we partied and indulged ourselves, not that I know anything about that, and did make some real progress, but we were naive. The 80s hit us like a great big bucket of very cold water. Now, just as the liberal side naively believed that the 60s and 70s would last forever, so has the right fallen into the same folly and believed that they would hold sway forever, and it emboldened them to pursue their policies unfettered. This past 8 years has shown what unbridled conservatism, when the center is leading their way and they have control of government and the lion's share of the mass mind, inevitably leads to. But the center has awoken to it and is reacting as it will by moving once again toward the prevailing direction of liberality and enlightenment. Another major cycle at play here involves the distribution of wealth and power. Coming out of the Great Depression, there was a major redistribution of wealth and power that decreased the wealth and power of the super rich and created a huge and powerful middle class. This resulted in the greatest era of increased prosperity for the largest number of people in history. Yes, some were left out of that, and that is what spawned the civil rights movement and feminist movements. But that redistribution produced phenomenal results that we have been coasting along on while it has been consciously attacked and reversed by those whose power was decreased by the old New Deal. What we see now is the result of movement conservatism. Google it. Movement conservatism. Google it. Now, in an example of exquisite timing and synchronicity, I gotta tell you, I wrote this piece yesterday, Sunday the 12th. Today is Monday the 13th, October 13th, and just this very morning, Paul Krugman, whose book, The Conscience of a Liberal, was named as a Nobel Prize winner for economics. This book is where I got a lot of what I'm talking about when I speak of movement conservatism and what it has accomplished. Google Paul Krugman, Google movement conservatism. You need to know about this. Now, movement conservatism began immediately with the advent of the New Deal, but really took off with the 60s as social conservatives disapproved of the liberal excesses of the 60s and 70s and provided fertile ground for conservative means to take root. This process has been consistently and consciously pursued and has been all too successful. Hillary was not wrong when she spoke of a vast right-wing conspiracy. Wealth and power has once again been concentrated into the hands of the richest 1% of Americans, like at no time since the end of the Gilded Age in the 20s. Even that bulwark of the New Deal, Social Security, was almost privatized. Imagine if the Social Security Trust Fund had been invested in today's market. Whoa. All right, back to point. These converging cycles have brought us to another dark and scary time in our history, but it's important to know that this is not the first or the last time we'll get to places like this. But it's even more important to know that the middle is indeed moving back towards liberality and enlightenment once again as part of the middle's cycle, and the concentration of wealth and power that movement conservatism has succeeded in, and you know what? Give them their due. It has been brilliantly conducted. But that success has led to its inevitable result. The middle is repulsed by it, and will no longer, for the foreseeable future, continue to vote against its own self-interest. So, both the convergence of these cycles and the astrological aspects connected to it, which I'll address in another video, support an Obama win and a return to our prevailing direction. And even if the election is close enough for the right to steal, come on, stealing elections is a time-honored tradition on both sides. And if you don't know that, you've not been paying attention. But even if Obama does not win this election, or somehow doesn't make it into the White House, the middle still swings and a New Deal is in the works. Quite independent of the astrology, these cycles I speak of will not be denied. Short of martial law and becoming Argentina in the 80s, which I cannot see happening here, no matter what the doom and gloomers say, and don't listen to the doom and gloomers. We are in a rebirth, a renewal of the prevailing direction towards liberality and enlightenment, and a resurgence of the true American spirit. Out of the darkness, the light emerges. Take heart. Take power. Let us use this period of our time in the sun to make much more progress than we did the last time. Have fun. By all means, have fun. But this time, let's get a great deal more carved in stone for future generations. Over this next 15 to 25 years of a liberal cultural assumption, we have unprecedented opportunity to create heaven on earth. Let the celebration begin. I'm Guy Spiro, and I thank you for your participation.